Hi, my name is Cody Smith, and I recently replaced the 2-barrel 2100 carburetor on my 1964 Mercury Monterey, which is the best old car I've ever owned, with FiTech EFI, and now it's the best running old car I've ever owned. And surprisingly, all of the old cars I've ever owned had a Ford FE engine. This is a 390, like I said, was a 2-barrel. The one above it is a 1966 Ford Country sedan, and that has a 352 4-barrel. I've also had a Galaxy with a 352 2-barrel and a Ford Thunderbird with a 390 4-barrel. So a lot of similar engines, all with either 2100 or 4100 Autolite carburetors, and they do work great. I like these things for carburetors. I've kept them on other cars, rebuilt them, and have a lot of nice things to say about them. But compared to fuel injection, man, you're looking at like 1956 technology. It gets better. And I know a lot of people have done videos on these things, so I'm not going to get into, really the overall view, the tuning, anything like that. Just kind of the nuts and bolts specifics of how to put it in, and some of the little issues I've seen with other videos and what I think about it. So I also had to, since I was going to a 2-barrel, from a 2-barrel to a 4-barrel, had to replace these, which are really cool. And I'll show you that I didn't have to step down very far. I got some really cool valve covers that have the PCV and oil fill caps in them. So here is what it looks like now, and it doesn't scream modern fuel injection when you're just looking at it. There are a few clues, like this Edelbrock sump over here tucked in next to the horn, but it still mostly just looks like a classic carbureted engine. And don't worry, on the air cleaner, haven't gotten to it yet, but that's going to be gold too. And here are the new 1965 Mercury script valve covers, pent roof, and those look awesome. And they have the provision to put the breather and PCV in the valve cover. The old 2-barrel manifold had it all built into the manifold. This is an Edelbrock Streetmaster, which I did some mild porting on in another video, and that doesn't have any of those provisions. Now with that air cleaner off, you can see the FiTech unit and the throttle blades on here. This thing's similar to about a 900 CFI carburetor. Specifically, this is a 600 horsepower power adder, so it has a bunch more functionality than some of the basic units, and way more in there than this motor really needs. But since it's fuel injected and signal to the carburetor doesn't really matter anymore, this thing's gonna work great. So let's run through some of the basic install on this. What I have is, let's see, there it is, right in the front there, the water temperature sensor. Over here, what I did was I drilled and tapped the top of the heater hose outlet to put the old gauge sensor in, and that's a big chunky piece of material, so that goes in just fine. Then back over here is the O2 sensor, and that's clamped on with the kit from FiTech. The bung is clamped on. Eventually I'll put headers on this thing and weld it in. You can see some of the orange high temp RTV, and that's because this did have, like many FEs, an exhaust leak, which will throw off the O2 sensor. So I got this side all sealed up so it's no longer leaking, and it'll get accurate air fuel ratio. Then for the other wiring, see here a red and orange wire coming out. The red wire is for battery positive. I went right to the solenoid terminal here, coming right off the battery for a nice place to put it, and I'll get full battery voltage. Then the orange wire, that's for the fuel pump. That comes over here to my Edelbrock sump, which on this 64 Mercury, which is just like a Galaxy, if you take out the high pitch horn, it fits right here in the engine compartment really nicely. It's all level and fairly hidden that it's tucked in there like that. It doesn't really stick out. That gets fed by the factory carbureted fuel pump coming in, and then it comes out through a filter, right into the unit. And this is self-regulated at the 58 psi the FiTech needs, so you don't need to actually use the FiTech fuel pressure regulator. Now I'm not using the timing control, so I don't have to get a billet distributor and phase it in. I've got this Mercury LED Unilight vacuum advance distributor. It works really nice, has a good timing curve already. So no reason to spend the money to get the billet, phase it in, everything like that. Makes it a lot simpler, and it runs great like this. Now for the throttle linkage, I use a factory throttle linkage, and it had a bend in it. I just flattened it out and then it fit just fine. And put a washer, drilled a hole in it, used a cotter pin, and hooked up right to the EFI unit very nicely. The other wires you have to put in, the blue wire going to the negative terminal, that's your tax signal. And the last one is a white wire that I have coming up around, and it goes right underneath the other factory harness, and that goes to the ignition switch. And that splices in with the coil power. Now on this, it has a resistor wire coming right off the switch, is a red with blue stripe, I believe it is, wire. That has full 12 volts. When it goes to the pink resistance wire, that drops down to, I think, 8 volts or so when you actually get to the coil. And you can't run 8 volts to the FiTech, so I spliced in right to the 12 volt wire. I stripped away a little bit of the insulation from the red wire with a razor blade, soldered in the white wire to splice into it, and then used a heat shrink to make it all one wire and a nice solid splice that's not going to come apart. Because that's important. That's your ignition and your power to your fuel injection. If that thing fails, your car's not going to run. A few other things I wanted to address that I had seen in other videos. One was when they started up these things with the fuel injection, the FiTech, it made this really big whistling noise that it just doesn't sound as good as a carburetor. And that's true, it doesn't, but you get the air cleaner back on it, you get the hood closed, and you really don't notice that. And a lot of it, I think, comes from the idle air control, which when you first fire it up, it really whistles because it's bypassing a lot. Those counts go up to, like, I think 190 is about what I see, and then they drop down to, it's got to be in a 3 to 7 range when you have it set up right, and most of that whistling noise goes away. So that's only really an initial and cold running that it whistles that much. But again, normal driving, you don't really notice it. The other thing I couldn't really find anybody to talk about was the Edelbrock fuel sump unit. And I was thinking about mounting it on the firewall, but I didn't know how loud it was going to be. And I'm really happy with how quiet it is. When you first turn the key and it primes, you hear it because it's the only noise that's happening. But once you get the engine running, and this has full mufflers, the exhausts aren't leaking anymore, you don't notice it at all. Again, I'm happy that it's up front, just to make sure I don't notice it, but even if it was on the firewall, I don't think I would. It's actually pretty quiet, way quieter than, say, like a Holley Blue pump or one of those old carburetor pumps that really make a lot of racket. So that's my experience with installing it, with driving it. Started up, started right away. You just turn the one screw in front until the idle air count at idle. I have mine, it bounces between about 4 and 6, right in that range, and it runs great. Transition, idle, throttle, cold starts, everything. I love it. So now it's 40 degrees in my Minnesota garage. Let's fire this thing off and see how easy it is. Fuel pump prime. Little shot down the throat.